The house didn't burn. It wasn't abandoned. It wasn't sold the way homes are supposed to be sold. One morning, it simply belonged to someone else. No moving wagons, no signatures, no explanation. The family who lived there didn't leave town. They didn't pack their lives into boxes. They didn't file a single report. Their names vanished from records the same night the locks were changed. And in a country built on paperwork, that kind of disappearance doesn't happen by accident. Because when a home changes owners overnight, without records, someone made sure the truth never followed. In America, ownership is supposed to be permanent on paper. Every home has a trail, deeds, signatures, tax records, designed to outlive the people who sign them. Houses don't change hands quietly. Families don't disappear without documentation. At least, they aren't supposed to. But scattered across rural counties, there are properties that break those rules, places where records stop mid-sentence, where names vanish between lines of ink, where a home continues to exist even after the people tied to it are erased. This story begins in one of those places, a modest house in an ordinary town, standing exactly where it always has. The structure never moved, the land never shifted, only the ownership did, suddenly and without explanation. What happened there wasn't loud or chaotic, it was procedural, silent, official-looking. And that silence allowed an entire family to slip out of history without ever being reported missing. Black Hollow, Arkansas was never meant to be remembered. It sat far enough from the nearest highway to avoid attention, but close enough to farmland to survive. A town built on routine, church on Sundays, fields at sunrise, doors locked early, and questions kept to a minimum. At the edge of that town stood the house. A two-story farmhouse with a wide front porch and narrow windows positioned where the dirt road thinned into trees. The kind of place people passed without slowing down, the kind of place that didn't invite curiosity. White paint, long since cracked and peeling, clung to wooden boards that outlasted several generations of ownership, at least on the surface. Beneath the house was a cellar. Low ceiling, packed dirt floor, one small window at ground level, just enough to let light in during the day and cold air in at night. It was meant for storage, root vegetables, tools, things you didn't want upstairs. Locals later said the house always felt colder than it should have, even in summer. But in the 1920s, that feeling went unspoken. Back then, the house was simply known as the Harper Place. Not famous, not feared, just another farmstead carved into land that had already changed hands more times than anyone could remember. The surrounding acreage stretched wider than most neighboring plots, good soil, stable water access, valuable land in a region where land was power. That alone made the property important, even if the people living there weren't. From the road, the house looked permanent, anchored, unmoving. It gave the impression that whatever happened inside its walls would stay there. At night, there were no streetlights. The only illumination came from kerosene lamps glowing faintly through the windows. When those lights went dark, the house blended into the trees so completely it could disappear from view. And eventually, it did, at least symbolically. Neighbors recalled that the Harpers kept to themselves, not unfriendly but reserved. They worked the land, they paid their dues, they didn't draw attention. Their children walked the same path to school every morning. Eleanor Harper hung laundry on the same line every week. Thomas Harper repaired the same fence every spring. Routine creates invisibility, and invisibility creates opportunity. The house sat far enough from town center that screams, if there were any, would not carry. Far enough from neighbors that lights going out early wouldn't raise concern. Close enough to be seen, but distant enough not to be watched. That balance mattered. What made the place truly dangerous wasn't isolation, it was plausibility. Nothing about the house suggested crime, nothing about the land suggested urgency. It didn't look like a place where people vanish, it looked like a place where things quietly change. By the winter of 1929, snow covered the yard in uneven patches. Footprints came and went, smoke rose from the chimney. Everything appeared normal. Then, without warning, the pattern stopped. No more smoke, no more lights, no more children walking the road. And yet, the house remained standing, intact, unlocked, waiting. Within weeks, someone else was living there. Furniture rearranged, curtains replaced, a new family occupying old space as if they had always been there. No visible transition, no wagons hauling possessions, no neighbors witnessing a move. The land didn't react, the structure didn't change, only the people did. And because the house never appeared abandoned, no alarm was raised. That's the danger of ordinary places. They don't announce when something terrible happens. They absorb it. Years later, investigators would note something strange about the foundation showing signs of modification around the cellar entrance. Subtle reinforcements, boards replaced more recently than the rest of the structure. Work done carefully, quietly. Someone had paid attention to the ground beneath the house. The place itself never told its story. It didn't have to. Because the home didn't change when the Harpers vanished, and that's what allowed the disappearance to succeed. The house didn't betray them. It kept standing.
If the house was silent, the paperwork was supposed to speak. In America, land ownership leaves a trail. Deeds are filed, transfers are logged, taxes are collected. Even in the early 20th century, there were rules designed to make sure property didn't simply vanish from the system. Paper was power. Ink was proof. But when investigators later tried to trace the history of the Harper property, the trail didn't just fade. It stopped. County records between 1918 and 1932 should have been routine, ledgers filled with names, dates, signatures. Instead, entire sections were missing, pages torn out. Some books replaced with newer copies that skipped critical years altogether. Officials offered a simple explanation: a courthouse fire. It was a convenient answer. Fires destroy records all the time, but there was a problem. Other properties from the same period were fully documented. Deeds from neighboring farms survived intact. Tax rolls from earlier and later years remained legible and complete. Only one address fell into a gap wide enough to swallow an entire family. The Harper name appeared regularly in the years leading up to 1929. Taxes paid, boundaries acknowledged. Then, suddenly, nothing. No sale, no foreclosure, no inheritance transfer, no probate filing. Just absence. And absence in legal systems isn't neutral. It's engineered. When land changes hands, someone signs something. Even illegal transfers leave traces, disputes, corrections, notes scribbled in margins. But here, there was no evidence of conflict. No red ink. No annotations. It was as if the house had politely asked permission to change owners, and the paperwork agreed not to remember it. The next recorded owner appeared in 1930, a distant relative by marriage. No explanation of how the property reached them. The deed listed the home as previously held, without naming who held it. That phrasing mattered. Clerks didn't write that by accident. It was language used when the origin of ownership was either unclear or intentionally omitted. And someone in that courthouse knew exactly which words would avoid scrutiny. Further digging revealed alterations. Handwriting styles changed mid-page. Ink tones didn't match. Dates were overwritten, subtly corrected. The kind of edits that don't scream forgery, but whisper adjustment. Enough to pass a casual review, not enough to survive careful attention. And careful attention never came. Because no one was looking for the Harpers. There were no missing persons reports to trigger concern, no bank disputes, no heirs demanding answers. The system only investigates when pressure is applied. In this case, there was none. School enrollment records offered another silence. James and Ruth Harper simply stopped attending. No transfer requests, no withdrawal forms. Their names disappeared between semesters, and no one followed up. Church logs told a similar story. The Harpers stopped appearing in attendance books. Communion lists skipped them without comment. Even death registers held nothing. No funerals, no burials, no departures. The paper world closed its eyes. One archivist, decades later, would quietly admit that certain names had been smoothed over during the early 1930s, a time of land seizures, debt collections, and quiet consolidations. Farms were taken, families displaced, records cleaned up to avoid disputes. It wasn't illegal if no one objected. And no one did. Because the Harpers had no living relatives nearby, no advocates, no lawyers to protect their claims. Their disappearance created no administrative inconvenience. So, the records complied. What remains most disturbing isn't what's missing, it's what was replaced. Clean copies, simplified ledgers, official versions designed to outlast memory. Paper can be edited. Truth cannot. But truth requires witnesses, and in Black Hollow, there were none willing to testify. By the time modern researchers attempted to reconstruct the chain of ownership, the damage was complete. The system had absorbed the lie so thoroughly that correcting it would require admitting intentional erasure. That never happened. Because the records weren't destroyed, they were curated. And in that curation, 4 lives were quietly removed, not by violence alone, but by ink, silence, and approval stamps that asked no questions. The house changed owners overnight. The paperwork made sure no one would ever ask why.
Before they became an absence, the Harpers were ordinary. That ordinariness is what makes them easy to erase. Thomas Harper was 39 years old in 1929. He worked the land the way his father had, methodically, without complaint. He wasn't wealthy, but he was steady. He believed that if you paid your debts and kept your head down, the system would leave you alone. It didn't. Eleanor Harper was known around Black Hollow as quiet but observant. She kept records of her own, birthdays, planting cycles, small expenses, written in careful handwriting inside a cloth-bound notebook. She understood patterns. She noticed when something shifted. The children, James and Ruth, were young enough to believe the world was stable. James was 10, old enough to help in the fields, young enough to still trust adults without question. Ruth was 7, known for humming while she walked, her shoes kicking dust along the road to school. Teachers described her as attentive. She liked to read aloud. None of them were troublemakers. The Harpers didn't drink heavily. They didn't fight publicly. They didn't owe large sums to banks or neighbors. On paper, they were the kind of family that doesn't disappear. But disappearance isn't always about guilt. Sometimes it's about vulnerability. Thomas had recently disputed a boundary line with a neighboring landholder. Nothing violent, nothing public, just a disagreement over where one property ended and another began. In rural counties, land disputes were common. What mattered was who had leverage. The Harpers didn't. By the fall of 1929, there were signs of strain. Thomas missed a tax payment, not by much, not long enough to raise alarms, but enough to be noticed by people who watch those things closely. Eleanor reportedly told a neighbor she felt uneasy, that things didn't feel right anymore. The neighbor remembered it years later, after the story had already settled into myth. The children sensed it too. James stopped staying out late.
Ruth asked questions adults didn't answer. Then came the winter. The last confirmed sighting of the Harper family was a Sunday afternoon in December. They attended church, sat in their usual pew, left together. They were never seen again. No one recalled hearing an argument. No signs of struggle were found. No blood, no broken doors. Their clothes remained in drawers. Toys stayed where they'd been left. It was as if the family had stood up from their lives and stepped out of them. And yet, that kind of disappearance leaves ripples. James' school books were still on his desk. Ruth's coat hung by the door weeks after she stopped attending class. Eleanor's laundry line remained empty, untouched. Ordinary life doesn't stop mid-motion unless something forces it to. Some locals whispered that the Harpers had been sent away. Others suggested they'd fled debt, but those theories collapsed under scrutiny. There was no destination, no relatives, no money withdrawn, and no bodies. What remains chilling is how quickly the town accepted their absence. Within months, people spoke of the Harpers in the past tense, without context, as if they'd simply expired as a concept. Because when a family disappears quietly, it gives others permission to move on. The new occupants of the house never spoke their names. They avoided the school, avoided the church for a time. When they did appear, they acted as if the property had always been theirs. The children were never replaced. No new laughter, no small shoes by the door. Just silence where four voices had been. Eleanor's notebook was never recovered, neither were family photographs. Anything that might preserve memory was gone. That wasn't accidental. Memory is dangerous. It challenges official versions. It demands explanation. The Harpers were erased not just physically, but socially. Their existence became inconvenient to acknowledge. People who remembered them learned to speak less. Those who didn't remember learned nothing at all. And that's how a family disappears twice, once from their home and once from history. By the time questions were asked decades later, the Harpers had already become shadows. Names without context, lives without documentation. And without proof, they were easy to dismiss. Because in systems built on records, those without paper are treated as if they were never real. Silence is a powerful thing. It can protect, obscure, or destroy. In Black Hollow, it did all three. After the Harpers vanished, the town adjusted quickly, not with shock or investigation, but with quiet acceptance. People didn't ask questions aloud. They didn't call authorities. They didn't knock on doors. In small towns, silence often speaks louder than words, and in this case, it spoke volumes. Neighbors recalled seeing the house remain occupied. A new family moved in seemingly overnight. The curtains were different. The smoke from the chimney came from new fires. Yet the house itself, the physical structure, appeared untouched. It was as though the Harpers had simply evaporated, leaving only walls and floorboards behind. The unbroken continuity of the building made it easy for residents to ignore the missing family. After all, if the house was lived in, how could the owners be gone? Neighbors whispered, but whispers were fleeting, fragmented, and mostly self-censored. They probably left town, some said. Family trouble, others guessed. The words never became records. No one wanted to provoke scrutiny that might drag the town into unwanted attention. Silence became the shield of convenience. Even the authorities were absent. Police logs from the era reveal no missing person report for Thomas, Eleanor, James, or Ruth Harper. No calls, no complaints, no inquiries. It was as if the system had decided that their disappearance wasn't worth noting. The courthouse records, already partially destroyed, conveniently left no trace. And the surviving documents were carefully sanitized. Deeds transferred, names edited, ink smoothed over where questions might arise. Silence and paperwork became indistinguishable. The children's absence created small ripples. Teachers noticed them at first. James and Ruth did not show up to school. The principal sent letters. No responses came. Yet after a time, even this small disruption was absorbed. New students arrived, registers were updated, names were scratched out or quietly ignored. Classrooms continued, undisturbed by the disappearance. Life, in its rigid routine, moved forward without them. Even within the town's social fabric, the silence was deliberate. Families avoided speaking about the Harpers. Church attendance logs show their absence after the last Sunday in December, yet no sermons, no announcements, no memorials noted them. In conversations decades later, older residents spoke of the family cautiously, almost apologetically, as if acknowledging them out loud might summon questions they didn't want to answer. The act of remembering became dangerous, or at least inconvenient. This silence extended into history itself. Newspapers, which often serve as the memory of communities, contain no obituary notices, no crime reports, no letters to the editor questioning sudden absenteeism. The Harpers exist only in fleeting anecdotes, recalled by neighbors who later admitted their memories were incomplete, often contradicted by someone else's. Every attempt to piece together their lives runs into the same obstacle, the quiet wall erected by years of deliberate, cumulative omission. The house itself seemed to reinforce the silence. It stood still, unchanged, unyielding, yet full of absence. The walls absorbed what happened inside them, and the town allowed the story to fade into the background, leaving only the illusion of continuity. Outsiders visiting the property decades later noted the same eeriness, a home that appeared lived in, yet whispered of forgotten lives. Shadows in corners seemed heavier, as though the building itself remembered. This quiet wasn't accidental. It was enforced in subtle ways. People who might have known something were conditioned by fear, by convenience, by social pressure to stay silent. Children learned not to ask. Adults learned not to probe. Any deviation from the narrative of ordinariness threatened disruption, and disruption was more dangerous than ambiguity. Silence has a rhythm. It's not just the absence of sound. It's the deliberate shaping of memory, the way questions are left unasked, the way names are left unrecorded. In Black Hollow, that rhythm dominated. The Harpers ceased to exist publicly, and even privately, recollections became fragmented, unreliable, and softened over time. By the time modern researchers began tracing the story decades later, the silence was already complete. Interviews yielded conflicting accounts, handwritten notes were lost, memories contradicted each other. Even forensic evidence was minimal. The combination of time, deliberate erasure, and communal quiet created an almost impenetrable wall. And that is the final weight of silence. It does not only conceal, it absolves those who remain. The town moved forward, the house remained, the Harpers became shadows. Silence in Black Hollow was not passive. It was active, protective, punishing, absolute. And it ensured that for generations, the story of the family who vanished overnight would remain untold. hidden beneath ordinary walls and ordinary days.
Decades passed before the Harper house revealed any trace of the family it had once concealed. By the 1980s, the property had passed through several owners, each one unaware of or unwilling to investigate the house's dark past. It looked ordinary on the outside: white paint, weathered boards, a wide porch that creaked in the wind. But inside, the house still carried secrets that refused to remain buried. In 1987, a renovation crew arrived to repair the foundation and update the plumbing. The work was routine, nothing unusual for a home of its age. But when they removed the cellar floorboards, they discovered something that made them stop cold. Beneath a layer of dirt and old support beams lay a rusted metal strongbox wedged tightly under the corner of the floor. It had clearly been hidden deliberately, designed to remain undiscovered for decades. The box was small but heavy, with a lock corroded by time. Whoever had placed it there had wanted it sealed away completely. No one at the site could identify a key or combination. After several attempts, they forced it open. What they found inside was haunting. First were the children's shoes. Tiny, worn, and dust-covered. They had been carefully placed, almost reverently, side by side. Next came a broken pocket watch, the hands frozen at 3:17. Its face was scratched and discolored, but it had belonged to someone who had kept time meticulously. And then there were handwritten notes, written in an elegant hand that matched descriptions of Eleanor Harper's careful script. The dates on the notes were particularly disturbing, several years after the family had supposedly vanished. The notes were mundane at first glance: reminders, lists of chores, small reflections about the farm. But together, they painted a picture that contradicted everything the official story suggested. The Harpers had not left voluntarily, as the county records implied. Someone or something had intervened. The family had been present, at least in these remnants, after they were assumed gone. Forensic investigators later examined the strongbox and its contents. They found traces of soil and plant matter consistent with the cellar floor, but no fingerprints beyond what could be attributed to decades of handling by family members long gone. Every piece of evidence hinted at deliberate concealment. The box was hidden, the floor repaired over it, and the passage of time had been relied upon as a shield. Whoever did this had calculated that after enough years, no one would question the absence. Local historians were brought in after news of the discovery spread. They scoured archives, comparing dates, deeds, and tax records. But every trail led to dead ends. County logs showed property transfers, but no mention of the Harpers' departure. Tax payments abruptly stopped. School records listed James and Ruth for the final time, then ceased entirely. There was no explanation, no rationale. The official story, carefully constructed, was that the house had changed hands legally and cleanly. The artifacts in the cellar said otherwise. The discovery reignited whispers in Black Hollow. Older residents remembered seeing the family, but memories conflicted. Some recalled the Harpers leaving quietly. Others swore they were there long after they were supposed to be gone. The strongbox confirmed the most troubling truth. The disappearance had not been accidental. The family had been deliberately removed from view, and someone had gone to great lengths to cover it up. It was the kind of revelation that changes how a town remembers itself. Ordinary walls held extraordinary secrets. The house, which had seemed like a simple farmhouse, had become a silent witness to injustice. And the artifacts, the shoes, the watch, the notes, served as evidence that life had continued in secret, even as official history pretended it had ended. Investigators concluded that the removal of the family was meticulous, intentional, and calculated. The house had been the perfect cover: ordinary, unassuming, and overlooked. Its walls concealed actions that paperwork could never admit. And after nearly 60 decades, it still whispered its story, refusing to be silenced entirely. The strongbox remains a chilling reminder.
evidence can outlast attempts to erase history. A house may seem ordinary, a family may seem forgotten, but sometimes, buried beneath floorboards and decades of dust, the truth waits patiently for someone willing to uncover it. In Black Hollow, the Harper house had finally spoken.
The discovery of the strongbox in 1987 answered some questions but raised far more. The Harpers' disappearance had never been accidental. Something deliberate had occurred, something calculated. And the more historians and investigators delved into the case, the more it became clear that this was not merely a family vanishing, it was a systematic erasure, a cover-up woven into the very fabric of Black Hollow. The official records were the first sign. The county had claimed that the property transferred legally to a distant relative after the Harpers supposedly left. But as the renovation crew's findings made evident, that version of events was misleading at best and false at worst. Deeds were altered, dates overwritten, and crucial names removed. Pages had been replaced or smoothed over so that the chain of ownership appeared continuous, clean, and legitimate. To any casual observer or anyone relying solely on official documents, it looked as though the transfer had always been above board. Yet the artifacts in the cellar told a different story. The children's shoes carefully arranged, Eleanor's notes written years after the official disappearance, Thomas's tools untouched and tucked into corners, they all spoke of lives interrupted, not relocated. The family had been there long after records said they had vanished, suggesting someone had intentionally fabricated the official timeline. Whispers in Black Hollow added another layer. Older residents recalled odd occurrences, strangers visiting the house late at night, fences being repaired mysteriously, the sudden arrival of new occupants who acted as if they'd always been there. These events were never reported, never questioned. The town's collective silence had become part of the cover-up. People didn't speak because to speak was dangerous. To acknowledge the Harpers' disappearance meant questioning neighbors, questioning authorities, questioning the integrity of the system itself. In small towns, such challenges were often discouraged, sometimes violently, sometimes simply through social pressure. There were also legal anomalies. The tax records, though partially missing, had been adjusted to show uninterrupted payments by the new owners. School enrollment for James and Ruth was abruptly marked transferred, though no records indicated where they went. Church registers recorded the family attending services for years after they supposedly vanished, but later entries erased their names without explanation. The erasure was deliberate, layered, and thorough. It wasn't a mistake, it was a plan, executed quietly but effectively. Who orchestrated this remains uncertain. Some historians speculate it involved local landowners seeking control of the property. Others suggest legal authorities had a hand in suppressing disputes, ensuring no claims interfered with the new ownership. Still others hint at darker motivations, family disputes, deaths or threats that forced the Harpers out and erased them from public memory. Whatever the reason, one fact is clear. The cover-up was designed to prevent discovery and avoid accountability. The mechanics of the cover-up reveal its meticulous nature. The strongbox was concealed beneath floorboards, the cellar patched to hide evidence. New deeds and tax records were issued, sanitizing the timeline. Community memory was reshaped. Anyone who remembered the Harpers differently learned to stay quiet. Even decades later, attempts to piece together the family's story were frustrated by conflicting accounts and missing documents. It was as if history itself had been edited to conform to the desires of those in power. Yet no cover-up is perfect. The artifacts eventually emerged. Dust and decay revealed what ink had tried to erase. And while the truth could not restore the Harpers, it did expose the extent to which ordinary systems, records, registers, and social norms can be manipulated to hide injustice.
The house was the perfect instrument for this quiet erasure, ordinary, inconspicuous, overlooked. Its walls absorbed secrets, and its continued occupancy by new owners made detection unlikely. Official records reinforced the illusion. Neighbors, constrained by fear or habit, enforced silence. The combination of physical concealment and administrative complicity ensured that the Harpers' absence would remain unchallenged for decades. Even now, the cover-up is only partially understood. Researchers continue to uncover inconsistencies in deeds, tax logs, and archival documents. Oral histories contradict each other. The artifacts in the cellar raise more questions than answers. No arrests were ever made, no one was held accountable, and yet the evidence remains, a silent indictment of those who chose expedience over truth. The Harper House stands today as a testament to the power of erasure, to the lengths people will go to manipulate history, and to the fragility of memory when systems fail to protect the innocent. In Black Hollow, the past was rewritten. The Harpers were removed not just from their home, but from existence in the eyes of society. The house endured, witnesses silenced, and the truth carefully buried beneath the weight of decades of deliberate omission.
The story of the Harper family is not just about a house or missing paperwork. It is about what happens when ordinary systems, records, neighbors, and institutions fail, or worse, are manipulated. By the time researchers pieced together fragments of the truth, decades had passed. A family had been erased from the history books, and the town that knew them had learned to accept silence as fact. Their absence became the new normal, a cautionary tale hidden in plain sight. History is often thought of as immutable. Paper records, census data, tax rolls, they are supposed to be proof of lives lived. Yet in the case of the Harpers, these instruments of certainty became tools of concealment. Deeds were altered, dates rewritten, names removed. School records stopped without explanation. Church registers scrubbed their presence. Even oral histories once thought reliable became fragmented and contradictory, shaped over time by forgetfulness and fear. The very systems designed to preserve life stories had been weaponized to erase them. The house itself was complicit. Standing quietly at the edge of Black Hollow, it absorbed the absence and reflected only what others were willing to see. Its walls and floorboards witnessed actions that the outside world was never meant to know. For decades, it existed as a paradox, ordinary and yet extraordinary, silent yet full of evidence. The discovery of the strongbox beneath the cellar floor in 1987 reminded the world that truth can survive in subtle, hidden forms, even when society pretends it doesn't exist. Children's shoes, a broken pocket watch, and Eleanor Harper's meticulous notes, all artifacts of lives interrupted, spoke louder than the clean official records ever could. The scale of the cover-up illustrates a troubling reality. Erasure can be quiet and methodical. There were no headlines, no criminal investigations, no outrage. Instead, the disappearance was absorbed into everyday life. Neighbors who might have remembered were silenced by fear, by habit, or by the implicit understanding that some questions were better left unasked. Local authorities did not investigate, and in that absence of scrutiny, the cover-up flourished. The Harpers were removed not with violence alone, but with bureaucracy, with social compliance, and with a collective willingness to ignore inconvenient truths. Reflecting on the Harper case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about memory, accountability, and justice. Families do not vanish without a trace, but systems can be manipulated so effectively that traces are nearly impossible to find. What was left behind, the house, the cellar, the strongbox, serves as a silent testament to their existence, a reminder that erasure is never perfect. Even decades later, fragments remain, urging us to remember, to question, to investigate.
Perhaps the most haunting aspect is how ordinary life continued around this extraordinary injustice. Children played near the farmhouse, school bells rang, and new families moved into the property, all while the Harper's story was quietly rewritten or erased. The community adapted, not out of malice, but out of convenience and social conformity. They witnessed absence, yet chose silence. And in that silence, the erasure became complete. The Harper House now stands as a monument to memory and omission. To look at it is to see normalcy, a home, a yard, trees swaying in the wind, but underneath lies evidence of manipulation, of lives unrecorded, of truths hidden. It is a house that teaches a lesson about what happens when society prioritizes appearances over accuracy, when convenience outweighs accountability. It is a house that demands we ask questions, even when the answers are uncomfortable. Ultimately, the story is not just about what happened to the Harpers, but about what happens when ordinary mechanisms of governance and social structure fail the people they are meant to protect. Names can be erased, lives can be hidden, paperwork can lie, but memory, curiosity, and the search for truth can endure, sometimes resurfacing decades later in a quiet cellar, beneath layers of dirt and dust, waiting to remind us that erasure is never complete. The final reflection is this: history is not only the record of those who thrive and survive, it is also the story of those who are deliberately removed from it. And while institutions, people, and circumstances can attempt to hide a family, a life, or a truth, the evidence always finds a way to whisper, if only someone is willing to listen. In the case of the Harpers, the whispers remain. The shoes, the notes, the broken watch, they are echoes of lives that should not have been forgotten. And in those echoes, there is a message. Silence may be powerful, but it is never absolute. Some histories aren't lost. They're hidden. The pause lingers, letting the weight of erased lives settle before the final words. If stories like this fascinate you, hidden crimes, forgotten families, and secrets buried beneath ordinary walls, subscribe. Turn on notifications because the past is never fully gone, and there are more whispers waiting to be uncovered.